As I approach my vehicle, I'm looking for any puddles on the ground, such as coolant, power steering, diesel, or oil. My headlights, properly mounted and secured, no loose and missing nuts and bolts, not cracked or broken. They are clean, proper color clear. I have my left turn signal, right turn signal, four-way flashers, cab lights, and clearance lights. All properly mounted and secured, no loose and missing nuts and bolts, not cracked or broken. They are clean, they are the proper color, amber to the front. My fluid levels. My oil dipstick right here. I've checked the level by pulling it out, wiping it off, putting it back in, pulling it out, and making sure it's between the add and full mark. My coolant reservoir. Properly mounted and secured, no loose and missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, or broken. It is not leaking. I checked the fluid level through the sight glass. If it didn't have a sight glass, I'd remove the cap once the engine is cool, check the fluid level, make sure it's between the add and full mark. Power steering reservoir, properly mounted and secured, no loose and missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, or broken. It is not leaking. I checked the fluid level through the dipstick. If it didn't have a dipstick, I'd remove the cap and make sure it's between the add and full mark. All of my hoses are securely attached at both ends. No abrasions, bulges, or cuts. They are not leaking. Clamps and fittings are in place. They are not missing. They are not leaking. My air compressor is properly mounted and secured. No loose and missing nuts and bolts. Not cracked, bent, or broken. It is operating properly. It is not leaking. It is gear driven. My power steering pump, located right down there, is properly mounted and secured, no loose and missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, or broken. It is operating properly. It is not leaking. It is gear driven. My alternator is properly mounted and secured, no loose and missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, or broken. It is operating properly. My wires are securely attached. They are not cut, torn, burnt, or frayed. My alternator is belt driven. My belt is not cut, torn, or frayed, and does not deflect more than 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch. All my other belts are not cut, torn, or frayed, and they do not deflect more than 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch. My water pump is properly mounted and secured, no loose and missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, or broken. It is operating properly. It is not leaking. My water pump is belt driven. My steering gearbox and hoses, properly mounted and secured, no loose and missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, or broken. It is not leaking. The hoses are securely attached at both ends. No abrasions, bulges, or cuts. They are not leaking. Clamps and fittings are in place. They are not missing. They are not leaking. My steering linkage is properly mounted and secured, no loose and missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, or broken. My joints and sockets are not damaged, properly lubricated, free of debris. I have a front spring mount and a rear spring mount. Properly mounted and secured, no loose and missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, or broken. My leaf springs are properly mounted and secured, no loose and missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, or broken. None have shifted. My bushings are not damaged, properly lubricated, and free of debris. My U-bolts are properly mounted and secured, no loose and missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, or broken. My shock absorber is properly mounted and secured, no loose and missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, or broken. It is not leaking. Moving on to my brakes. My brake hose is properly secured at both ends. No abrasions, bulges, or cuts. It is not leaking. Clamps and fittings in place. They are not missing or leaking. It can supply air to my brake chamber. My brake chamber is properly mounted and secured. No loose or missing nuts, bolts, or pins. Not cracked, bent, or broken. There are no holes. It is not leaking. My brake clamp is in place. It is not missing. My slack adjuster and push rod is properly mounted and secured. No loose or missing nuts, bolts, or pins. Not cracked, bent, or broken. With the brakes released, my push rod cannot travel more than 1 inch. My brake drum is properly mounted and secured. No loose or missing nuts and bolts. Not cracked, bent, or broken. Free of illegal welds. Not worn dangerously thin. Free of contaminants such as oil and grease. My brake linings are properly mounted and secured. No loose or missing nuts and bolts. Not cracked, bent, or broken. Not worn dangerously thin. No less than 1/4 of an inch thickness. It is free of contaminants such as oil and grease. My tires. My tread is evenly worn, no abrasions, falls, or cuts. Minimum tread depth is 4/32. My sidewall. No abrasions, falls, or cuts. It is not damaged. My valve stem and valve cap properly mounted and secured. No loose or missing nuts and bolts. Not cracked, bent, or broken. It is not leaking. Cap is in place. I've checked the inflation with the tire gauge. My rims, starting with my bead flange. My bead flange is not damaged or dented. The rim itself is properly mounted and secured. No loose or missing nuts and bolts. Not cracked, bent, or broken. There are no oblong holes. Free of excessive rust. Free of illegal welds. My lug nuts are properly mounted and secured. No loose or missing nuts and bolts. Not cracked, bent, or broken. There are no distorted holes. No cracks radiating from the holes. Signs of looseness would be shiny threads or rust trails. My hub and axle seal properly mounted and secured. No loose or missing nuts and bolts. Not cracked, bent, or broken. It is not leaking. I would check the fluid level through the sight glass. If it didn't have a sight glass, I'd remove the plug and check the fluid level to make sure it's between the add and full mark. My door opens and closes, latches securely. The weather seal is securely attached, not cut, torn, or frayed. Hinges properly mounted and secured. No loose or missing nuts and bolts. Not cracked, bent, or broken. My window, it rolls up and it rolls down. It is not cracked or broken. It is clean, free of illegal stickers. My mirrors and mirror mounts properly mounted and secured. No loose or missing nuts and bolts. Not cracked, bent, or broken. The mirrors themselves are not cracked or broken. They are clean, free of illegal stickers. I have a left turn signal here, properly mounted and secured. No loose or missing nuts and bolts. Not cracked, bent, or broken. It is clean. It is a proper color, amber to the side. My fuel tank is properly mounted and secured. No loose or missing nuts, bolts, or straps. Not cracked, bent, or broken. It is not leaking. It has not shifted. Signs of shifting would be shininess under the straps. My fuel cap is tight. It is not leaking. I see no puddles on the ground. My drive shaft is properly mounted and secured. No loose or missing nuts and bolts. Not cracked, bent, or broken. It is not twisted. My U-joints are properly mounted and secured. No loose or missing caps. Properly lubricated, free of debris. My exhaust system is securely attached at both ends. No loose or missing nuts, bolts, or clamps. It is not leaking. Signs of leaking would be rust trails or soot trails. Tractor frame is properly mounted and secured. No loose or missing nuts and bolts. Not cracked, bent, or broken. It is free of illegal welds. My cross members are properly mounted and secured, no loose and missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, or broken. They are free of illegal welds, and none are missing. My catwalk and steps, properly mounted and secured, no loose and missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, or broken. It is free of debris and can hold my weight. My mounting bolts are properly mounted and secured, no loose and missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, or broken. My platform is properly mounted and secured, no loose and missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, or broken, free of broken welds. My fifth wheel skid plate is properly mounted and secured, no loose and missing nuts, bolts, or pins, not cracked, bent, or broken. It is properly lubricated. My release arm is not cracked, bent, or broken, and it is in the fully engaged position. My kingpin is not damaged, not cracked, bent, or broken. The jaws of my fifth wheel are locked securely around the shank of my kingpin. My apron is properly mounted and secured, no loose and missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, or broken, free of illegal welds, and there are no holes. There is no gap between my apron and my fifth wheel skid plate. My airlines are securely attached at both ends, no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. They are not leaking. Clamps and fittings are in place. They are not leaking. Glad hands are locked in place. They are not damaged. They are not leaking. My electrical line is securely locked at both ends. It is not cut, torn, frayed, burnt, chafed, taped, or spliced. My drive axle suspension, my front and rear spring hangers, my leaf springs, my bushings, my U-bolts, my shock absorber. I checked the same as I did the front. My brakes, my brake line, my slack adjuster, my push rod, my brake canister, my brake clamp, brake drum, brake linings. I checked the same as I did the front. My tires, my tread, my sidewalls, valve stem, valve cap, inflation, I checked the same as I did the front, with the exception, minimum 2/32 tread depth. I have a bud spacing, evenly spaced, not damaged, free of debris. My rim, bead flange, lug nuts, I checked the same as I did the front. My hub and axle seal, I checked the same as I did the front, with the exception I checked the fluid level through the differential. I have an airbag. My airbag is properly mounted and secured, no loose and missing nuts and bolts, no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. It is not leaking. My upper and lower airbag mounts, properly mounted and secured, no loose and missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, or broken. I have a left turn signal, right turn signal, four-way flashers, brake lights, tail lights, properly mounted and secured, no loose and missing nuts and bolts. They are not cracked or broken, they are clean, they are the proper color, red to the rear. Clearance lights, properly mounted and secured, no loose and missing nuts and bolts, not cracked or broken. They are clean, proper color, amber to the front. The front of my trailer, no loose and missing nuts, bolts, or rivets. There are no holes. It can hold my freight. The side of my trailer, no loose and missing nuts, bolts, or rivets. There are no holes. It can hold my freight. I have at least 50% DOT reflective tape firmly adhered to the vehicle. It is clean and the proper color. My trailer frame is properly mounted and secured, no loose and missing nuts, bolts, or rivets, not cracked, bent, or broken, free of illegal welds. My cross members, properly mounted and secured, no loose and missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, or broken, free of illegal welds. None are missing. There are no holes in my floor. My landing gear is properly mounted and secured, no loose or missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, or broken. It is in the fully raised position. My handle is not cracked, bent, or broken, and it is properly stored. My landing pads, properly mounted and secured, no loose, missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, or broken. It is free of debris. And if I did not mention, my release arm is not cracked, bent, or broken. It is in the fully engaged position. Rear trailer axle, starting with my suspension. My front spring hanger, rear spring hanger, leaf springs, U-bolts, bushings. I check the same as I did the front. I have a torque arm which is square and a radius rod which is round, properly mounted and secured, no loose or missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, or broken. Bushings are in place, not damaged, properly lubricated, free of debris. My rear brakes, my brake hose, brake chamber, brake clamp, slack adjuster, push rod, brake drum, brake linings. I check the same as I did the front. My tires, my tread, my sidewalls, valve stem cap inflation, I check the same as I did the front, with the exception, minimum 2/30 seconds tread depth. My bud spacing, I check the same as I did my drive axle. My rim, bead flange, lug nuts, I check the same as I did the front. My hub and axle seal, I check the same as I did the front. My ABS light and marker light, properly mounted and secured, no loose or missing nuts and bolts, not cracked, bent, or broken. They are clean. They are the proper color, amber for the ABS, red to the rear. My door, open, closes, latches securely. There are no loose or missing nuts, bolts, or rivets. Hinges are in place, not missing. There are no holes in my door. My ties are properly mounted and secured. They're not cut, torn, or frayed. No loose or missing nuts, bolts, or pins. I have 100% DOT reflective tape firmly adhered to the vehicle. It is clean, proper color. My left turn signal, right turn signal, four-way flashers, tail lights, brake lights, clearance lights. Properly mounted and secured, no loose or missing nuts and bolts, not cracked or broken. They are clean, proper color, red to the rear. My mud flaps are properly mounted and secure, no loose or missing nuts and bolts, not cut, torn, or frayed. They are the proper distance from the ground. I checked my mud flaps on my tractor the same. I checked this side of the vehicle the same as I did this side. And that concludes my outside pre-trip.